Days after nuclear talks in Geneva, Russia and Iran are suggesting it was division within the P5+1 that prevented an initial deal. The US insists the 6 countries were unified and Iran was the problem. But reports about France's destructive role and its alleged bidding for Israel are raising a lot of eyebrows. Is there an invisible hand around the negotiating table upsetting any chance for agreement? What lies in the way of mutual trust? This is the debate.
Iranians, including ordinary citizens and officials, have repeatedly expressed pessimism about the sincerity of the Western parties to negotiations over the past years. The attitude grew in 2004 when Iran voluntarily suspended enrichment for 2 years, but resumed it after the other side failed to fulfill its commitments. This time around, talks in Geneva went ahead very smoothly initially. Reports coming out of the venue were speaking of a possible final agreement. But the positive mood suddenly changed. This after France's Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius set new conditions. Fabius, who has gained notoriety amongst many Iranians over the French exports of HIV-contaminated blood to Iran during his tenure as his country's prime minister, called on Tehran to end even low-level uranium enrichment and shut the Iraq facility. France's about-face in Geneva drew admiration from hardliners in the US, including Senator John McCain, who tweeted this message, "Long live France." One issue raised by Fabius was what he called Israel's concerns, which he said must be taken into consideration during the negotiations over Iran's nuclear energy program. This comes as Israel's vast nuclear arsenal is viewed as a massive threat to security of the Middle East and beyond. Many believe that the French opposition to a deal with Iran has emboldened the Israeli regime, which is continuing its shuttle diplomacy to urge the US against any agreement with Tehran. Israel's economy minister is to travel to the US on Wednesday to lobby American lawmakers to this end. The change in the direction of the talks in Geneva has made many in Iran more pessimistic about the sincerity of the Western parties to the negotiations.
They suddenly rushed to Geneva as if they had been in a hurry for something. They must have had made some agreement behind the scene with Israel, or perhaps Israel pressured them to go to Geneva. Otherwise, something would happen which would be to detriment of Tel Aviv.
Definitely Iran will one day reach an agreement with the other side. If they conclude that they are at a loss, not Iran, they will strike a deal. Over the past years, they have realized that they have suffered losses because we have mastered enrichment despite all sanctions.
You're watching The Debate. Joining me now live from New York is Sarah Flounders, co-director of the International Action Centre, and with us live from London, Secretary General of the Next Century Foundation, Mr. William Morris. Thank you very much for being with us, both of you. I'll start my first question and put that question to our guest in London, Mr. Morris. John Kerry is being blamed by Iran and Russia now for distorting reality, and they hint that it was France who sabotaged a deal that Iran was okay with, and that was an initial draft, but then France wanted changes to that initial draft. So the question here would be, what is the reason for this contradiction, and is Kerry trying to show that the P5+1 remains united?
Well, they're not united. I mean, clearly France did undermine the agreement, but there were cogent reasons in the view of some, certainly in the view of Israel, for France's actions. There was a need to look at the question of the Arak nuclear reactor, which is a heavy water reactor capable of producing the plutonium, which would make Iran a weapons-ready state. And there are concerns, no doubt, in Israel particularly, about the Arak reactor, and that was one of the key conditions that France thrust into these negotiations at the last minute. You can argue that it was subversive and deceitful and wrong, but nonetheless it represents a concern of some of the international community. So there's something that they had to worry about.
So you are saying then that John Kerry, despite the fact that there is no unity among the P5+1, is saying that there is?
Well, I mean, he's been pushed into a position, hasn't he, by France, and he thought about it and he decided that it was a reasonable position, so he went along with it. It's a French lead. It wasn't Kerry's idea. It was France's idea. No doubt France was prompted by Israel. But the point is that at the end of the day, Kerry viewed it as a legitimate concern, and the rest of the members of the P5 swung behind France. So I suppose, yeah, there is and there isn't unity. There is unity in so much as they've agreed to the French position at the end of the day, and they've all come round to that position. So France was the one that was out in front and took this tougher line.
Yes.
It's not very attractive to Iran, but there is an argument that it's very clear on this key position of the Arak reactor. Yes. Iran is willing to suspend the reactor up to a point, but it won't stop building the thing. Yeah, France is concerned on behalf of Israel, clearly.
Well, let's put this question of the Arak reactor now to Sarah Flounders in New York. Now, Ms. Flounders, we know that, according, of course, to reports that we're hearing, that France wanted Iran to end even the low-level uranium enrichment and to shut the Arak heavy water reactor. And the interesting point is these are exactly the demands that were made by Benjamin Netanyahu during his speech at the UN or elsewhere that he's been mentioning them. We are seeing now an agreement between Iran and the IAEA. Iran says that it is voluntarily allowing the IAEA inspectors into the Arak heavy water reactor, and it's saying this is going beyond its obligations under the NPT, but it's willing to do it. Do you think this position by France is actually sabotaging efforts to end the conflict or the debate and creating more tension rather than reducing the tension?
Well, first, I think it's important to say there is no sincerity and there is no unity among the powers making one demand after another on Iran. Iran has the legal right to enrich uranium, to develop nuclear energy. This is guaranteed by international treaties that Iran is a signatory to. So from the very beginning, the sanctions placed on Iran, the demands placed on Iran are criminal, illegal, outrageous. And yet, Iran has tried to meet each of these with negotiations and reaching a reasonable arrangement. And it's important to say that the U.S., who has imposed the strictest sanctions and demanded and enforced them on every other country doing any kind of business transaction with Iran, those sanctions come from the U.S. So Kerry is being duplicitous in every sense to blame Iran for any of this. And Iran's sabotage France's sabotage of any agreement with Iran may also serve certain predominant U.S. interests. They are speaking, yes, for Israel, but they also are speaking for U.S. interests that are determined to continue a state of war, militarism and threats on Iran and sanctions on Iran. So while talking diplomacy, there were real efforts to sabotage any genuine agreement, which Iran has shown every interest in arriving at an agreement.
Well, this brings us to the issue of trust, which is a major issue when it comes to nuclear negotiations. Mr. Morris, what is basically responsible for this lack of trust, if we could call it? Because, you know, Iran said initially that it wasn't interested in producing 20% enriched uranium anyway, and that it didn't see it as economical even for its own state of economy, but it had to when there was no guarantees that any country or the P5+1, even the IAEA, would give it the enriched uranium it needs for producing radioisotopes, etc. Why do you think Iran is not getting those guarantees, and how can Iran trust the West?
Well, I don't think Iran can trust anybody because everybody has an agenda because they are frightened of Iran. But having said that, there is a new level of willingness in the West to give the new president every chance, and I think these negotiations will ultimately succeed. I can see that the Arak reactor is a stumbling block. There is a fear of Iran becoming a weapons-ready nuclear state, as it were. But on the other hand, I think there is a real heart for some sort of deal. And I'm sure a deal will be reached ultimately. It's not going to be easy. And the West have dug its heels in because of pressure from Israel, clearly.
Do you think that a nuclear
and
deal...
if you like, pressure from hawks in the West.
If I could just jump in here, sorry. If you think that a nuclear deal is close at hand, can be reached, we know William Hague has said that it can be reached, even France has said. But a lot of people are saying as long as Israel is still involved in this, you know, invisibly present around the negotiating table, influencing the positions of countries like France, this is not going to happen.
I think it's going to make it much more difficult, but at the end of the day, I think there will be a deal. I think, actually, that there are two major international issues being negotiated in Geneva. There's also the subtext of the Syria problem, and these two will actually be conflated at the end of the time. You cannot disentangle these, Iran's position on Syria, Iran's position on the nuclear issue. There will be some sort of trade-off, but there will be a deal on both matters, and particularly, I think, on the nuclear issue. It has been very unfair. The sanctions have been very unfair because they've hit the Iranian people, not the Iranian government. And we need a way forward. But the international community is I believe, very willing to see this matter resolved. It's just not going to be easy. And I see the Arak reactor as a key sticking point, rather than the enrichment itself.
Okay, well, I did mention it before, and I'll just mention that again. Iran has told the IAEA that it is willing to let its inspectors into the Arak reactor. We'll have to see, of course, how this agreement is going to affect the talks. But just quickly, Sarah Flounders, I guess there in London, Ms. Flounders was saying that the West, or the P5+1, still sees Iran as a threat, even a nuclear threat, and this is why this trust between the two sides does not exist. But, you know, Iran is saying, why should we be seen as a threat when there is no evidence provided by the IAEA or anyone else, for that reason, that Iran has nuclear weapons or is even planning to develop nuclear weapons? Do you think that these fears about Iran as a threat are not based on facts and evidence?
Well, it's important to see why U.S., Britain, France would consider Iran a threat. And it was long before nuclear energy became an issue. The idea of independent development of Iran, free of Western domination and control, is very threatening to U.S. corporate power and to all the powers in the region that are subservient and dependent on U.S. power. And that means Israel, it means Saudi Arabia. The idea that they set the agenda is absolutely ridiculous. Wall Street sets the agenda, and they are threatened by the example of Iran, by the idea of a country developing its infrastructure, developing its educational and health of its whole population. That's very threatening. And also, they are threatened with the idea that they can't enforce regime change in Syria. Now, that's particularly galling to France, the former colonial power in Syria. And so they're outraged at Iran's solidarity and with Syria and resistance to a complete takeover. So there are a lot of issues that are very much interlinked. Is Iran a nuclear threat, developing nuclear energy? Of course not. They have the right to do so, and many, many other countries have nuclear energy. Yes. This is a fabricated, false issue because it's countries trying to stop the development of Iran on many, many levels and making use of the question of nuclear energy in order to try to shut down the Iranian economy. It has not succeeded, and Iran has continued a policy of talks. But let's be clear why the U.S. feels threatened, why France feels threatened, why Britain feels threatened to Iran's development.
Well, before we move on with the debate, I'd just like to give our viewers a little time to check out some of the comments that have been posted on our Facebook page about this subject, and we'll be back.
So when does the USA not lie? CNN even altered the translation of President Rouhani's interview. USA has been trying to dominate Iran and take its petroleum since 1953. A possible nuclear agreement between Iran and the United States would be disappointing for Israel. If it's good for the world, then Israel is against it. The U.S. cannot be trusted as it always stabs its allies and friends in the back. Think of NSA, PRISM, and drone attacks on Pakistan soil.
Those were some of the comments posted on our Facebook page. I'll go straight to Mr. Morris in London. Again, the issues that were raised there in those comments, Mr. Morris, and also the general public here in Iran generally believes that it's really hard for Iran to trust the United States. As I said before, a lot is being said about the influence of Israel, but there is also the reference, for instance, to the Tehran Declaration between Iran, Brazil and Turkey, if you might know, and there was also the decision by Iran some years back to even suspend uranium enrichment to build confidence. And Iran is saying, well, we did what we could, but this didn't lead to any deal, this didn't lead the United States to believe that Iran is actually being flexible and transparent. Is the United States or the P5+1 genuinely looking for a deal?
I think they are, very much so. And your other speaker is quite right about France. France has a second agenda. France is irritated by Iran's position in terms of Syria. And clearly that is of concern to the international community, which the international community would like President Bashar al-Assad to go. They don't care about much else. That's their one major issue. The fact that Iran is standing against this is certainly meant that France has taken a harder line. That, and I do believe it's pressure from Israel, not pressure from Wall Street. I disagree with your other speaker there. I think the Western businesses would like to see Iran opened up to more trade with the West. Their whole idea and their whole ethos is one of profit. So they will be, I take a different position. I don't think they're standing against this deal. And I do believe this deal will take place. And I come back to this fear of Iranian power, which has been made into a kind of bogeyman. There are ways that this can be diffused. I would like to see there's a supposed fatwa by the supreme leader. That fatwa, though many of us have asked to see the text of it put up on Iranian government websites or in some way shown publicly, it's never been put out, and this fatwa is supposed to be a fatwa against nuclear weapons. There are things little gestures of that kind that Iran could do that would build confidence. Trusting the West, Iran can't trust the West. It's a negotiation in which we need the West to come with real, with the lifting of sanctions, clearly, which is what Iran expects.
If I could stop you there, if I may.
Both sides are very cautious.
Yeah, we are quickly running out of time. Just a little mention there, Iran's leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, he has publicly said that it's forbidden in Islam, and Iran also considers it forbidden to develop nuclear weapons. And that fatwa does exist, as is well known in Iran. But just quickly, I'll go to Sarah Flounders and I'll be back with you. Sarah, a lot of people are saying now that is the United States divided on this nuclear issue? We're hearing the Israeli economy minister going to Congress, going to lobby lawmakers there. Do you think the Obama administration stands separate from the stance that Congress is taking?
Well, there always will be debates and differences, within the U.S. And internationally, its allies and competitors, and their competing interests within the U.S. But it's important to recognize that when we say Wall Street, corporate power, the military industries in the U.S., that the domination of oil, profits, is what they seek, not oil accessible on an international scale. And it's that reason that Iran is threatening to them. Iran is making its own agreements with Russia, with China, with Latin America, with the entire world. Yes. And so it's outside the domination of the U.S. And that is why the very powers dependent on the U.S., such as Israel and Saudi Arabia, and also France in another way, are so threatened by any agreement with Iran, and yes. also interests in the U.S., whose profits are based on war and domination of the oil markets and the military industries, which are very linked in with the banks. They are also threatened by any agreement, any diplomatic
I'll stop you there if I may.
So at any rate, we wish Iran well in these talks, but it's important to recognize why there are these threats and why there is no trust.
We've just got under a minute of time here. I'll just give both of you 30 seconds if I may. I guess in London, Mr. Morris, quickly, do you think that speaking of sanctions and more pressure now on Iran at this stage is not at all helpful?
Of course it's not. No, we need a deal. We need one quickly. We need to take and use the goodwill that it does exist amongst people of good heart. I would like, you did allude to the fatwa. It's been alluded to many times, but we in the West have yet to see the text of it, so yes. It would be very useful to see that made public. Yes, I think Iran, this deal must take place. We're very excited about it.
Yes.
It's very necessary, and these sanctions must go, and Iran must take its proper place.
And Sarah Flounders, I guess there in London was saying we have to see that fatwa. Do you think there isn't enough reason to believe that Iran is actually not seeking nuclear weapons?
Iran is not seeking nuclear weapons. Iran has the right to develop nuclear energy and has a right to demand that the sanctions be lifted. And we're certainly hopeful that some agreement can be reached. But the people of the world, it's important they recognize Iran's right, which they do. And the U.S. is more isolated on this issue than ever before. So we hope that the talks will move forward and the sanctions, these criminal, illegal sanctions, will be lifted, will end.
Thank you very much. In New York, Sarah Flounders, co-director of the International Action Centre, with us. A big thank you to our guest in London, Secretary General of the Next Century Foundation, Mr. William Morris. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us here on another edition of The Debate. From me, Homa Lezgi. Until our next programme, it's goodbye.